Thanks very much, everyone. Let's make a start. My name's Patrick Hall. I'm the Mayor of the City of Canning. It's Tuesday, the 9th of May, 2023. I welcome you all to this evening's meeting, and we kick off right on time at 6 p.m, and I declare the meeting open. We start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land, and we pay our respects to elders both past and present. In accordance with City of Canning Policy CM 105, agenda briefings are conducted for the purpose of providing elected members with a forum to ask questions of the city's administration and to receive answers to those questions to enable informed decision-making by council. In accordance with the Local Government Act of 1995, agenda briefings are not decision-making forums, and questions may be asked and answered, and there is to be no debate or discussion. Questions must be specifically relevant to the item being discussed. Elected members and employees must disclose any financial proximity or partiality interest that they may have in an item to be discussed and declare the nature of that interest at the commencement of the briefing or at the latest when the item is about to be discussed. If a member or employee has a financial proximity or partiality interest in a matter arising during discussion, the nature of that interest must be disclosed. Interests are to be disclosed in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act as they apply to council meetings. Individuals disclosing an interest other than a partiality interest must not participate in that part of a briefing relating to their interest and must leave the room while the item is under discussion. Agenda briefings are not public meetings, and any information provided to the meeting by attendees may be publicly accessible. Can I ask everybody here this evening to please turn off your mobile phones, please? Thank you very much. For the duration of the meeting, including councillors, please can we have your phones off and away? And for the sake of the recording, this briefing is actually being live streamed via the City's YouTube channel. At item 2 on tonight's agenda, apologies. Councillor Parkinson is an apology for this evening's meeting. Approved leave of absence, there is none. Disclosures of interest. Mr CEO Michael Littleton, can you please advise of any disclosures?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In relation to item 3.1, declarations of interest of a financial interest, there are none. In relation to item 3.2, declarations of impartiality interest, I have received 2. The first from Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza in relation to item CD 00623, specifically in relation to the item adjourned motion stage 2 of Jandakot Eastern Link Road progress to detailed design phase 2. The nature of the association is I have long been a volunteer at a conservation centre that was established with the sole aim to help West Australian endangered black cockatoo populations. Given the proposed Jandakot Eastern Link Road has been found to pose significant risk to local black cockatoo populations, there may be a perception that my volunteer role may adversely affect my impartiality. The second declaration of impartiality interest was received from Councillor Steve Parkinson, again in relation to item CD 00623, the adjourned motion stage 2 of Jandakot Eastern Link Road progress to detailed design. The nature of Councillor Parkinson's association is I am a council delegate on Jandakot Airport Community Aviation Group.
Thank you, CEO. There are no further disclosures, and Councillor Parkinson, as was noted earlier in the agenda, is absent this evening. We move on to item 4, which are question time for the public. Item 4.1, response to previous questions taken on notice. Responses to previous questions taken on notice will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda. Question time from the public. The time set aside is 15 minutes, which will be extended if necessary. Question must be related to an item on the agenda. For recording purposes, I'll ask those coming forward to please state your name and address clearly and then proceed to ask your question. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with policy, members of the public who have registered their interest to ask questions shall be called upon in the order in which registrations were received. We have received questions from Dr. Wajon, Ms Whitehead and Mr Hilton in that order. I'll open public question time now. The time is 6:04 p.m. I have Dr. Wajon. Sorry, can I ask you to please step forward introduce yourself to the meeting, or just wait till we turn on the microphone for you? I'll just wait till we turn on the microphone for you. The microphone is now on. Thank you.
So I had posed those questions, but I've declined in favour of my deputation, which hopefully will come tonight. So I declined to ask those questions. At the
Terrific.
moment.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. You have a deputation coming up. I appreciate that. Ms Whitehead, would you like to step forward to the microphone, please?
Good evening. It's Dr. Whitehead, actually. My question...
I'll just ask you to just state your address, if you don't mind, or the street in which you live.
Yes, Unit 580 Centre Street, Queen's Park.
Thank you.
Short question. Why is saving 8 minutes of motorist time more important than increasing the risk of the extinction of Carnaby's black cockatoo?
Thank you. We have a Ms Whitehead, I apologise. Director Graham Bright will provide a response. Director Bright.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The City is committed to the preservation and enhancement of conservation sites throughout the City in line with its local biodiversity strategy. The strategy was drafted with the proposed Jandakot Eastern Link Road in mind, and there are recommendations within the strategy to reinforce the City's commitment to the local area by proposing the closure of roads and the rezoning of spaces to protect it from future development, while also commitment to revegetating over 67 hectares in the precinct. The biodiversity strategy does not speak against the proposed project. The City has also proposed a number of design solutions to reduce the likelihood of vehicle strikes, more so than any other known developments elsewhere in the metro area.
Thank you, Director. Mr Hilton, I have a request here for you to ask a question. Do we have a Mr Hilton here? We have a question previously, I think, from a Mr Hilton. I'll read the question to the meeting. It's been sent in to us, so I'm happy to read it. Can the Council guarantee that there will not be any clearing of native vegetation currently designated as bush forever? That's obviously in response to the same item on tonight's agenda. Director Bride.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, the current Metropolitan Region Scheme reservation does include a small portion of the Bush Forever Site 388. When the MRS amendment for the Link Road was approved by the State Government, to compensate for this clearing, offsets were proposed. And again, the City is proposing to revegetate over 67 hectares of adjacent land parcels.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions, everyone. We've got 5 deputations to get through in just a moment. I propose to move to those unless there are other further questions that anyone would like to ask from the floor before we move on. Thank you. Then we will move on to those deputations, the first of which is Ms Mawson. Can I ask you to please step forward, introduce yourself to the Council? You shouldn't need any introduction, and I might just ask you to remove your mask if you feel comfortable doing that, only because we might be hard for us to pick you up. You happy?
No, sorry, I'm
Leave it
not
on. Okay, go ahead. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening. My name's Sian Mawson from 86 Gibbs Street, East Cannington. I speak in support of Deputy Mayor Kunz's foreshadowed motion CD 006 of 23. But first, I want to acknowledge the community members in the gallery who have joined me here this evening and who also support this motion. I don't agree to the environmental damage that would be inflicted upon Bush Forever Site 388 should the proposed Jandakot Eastern Link Road proceed. There is a reason why Bush Forever sites are called Bush Forever. Bush Forever areas are recognised as significant remnants of the vegetation that originally covered the land. They are part of our comprehensive, adequate and representative reserve system. We cannot take a slice off here and a corner off there and expect that there will be no environmental consequences. This is death by 1,000 cuts. The title of Bush Forever should mean Bush Forever, and we have a collective responsibility to ensure this. We have heard that we need to strike a balance or make compromises where there are environmental concerns. To see where the balance lies, let's look at the equation so far. Before European settlement, the whole of the city of Canning was covered by native vegetation. The city's local biodiversity strategy tells us that since European settlement, native vegetation cover has been reduced from 100% to 6.6%. How far does the balance need to swing before we say we have compromised the environment enough? Yes, degraded land will be revegetated to compensate for the proposed clearing, but revegetation too is a compromise. Let me demonstrate. 130 native plant species were identified in the flora survey of neighbouring lots 166 and 167. But only 72 of these species are available to purchase from native plant suppliers. The other species are just not available. That means our best efforts of revegetation can only put back 55% of what was there before. It is better than nothing, but cannot replicate an intact ecosystem. While some of our fauna will survive in smaller parcels of land, there are others that will not. Likewise, there are some animals that will tolerate living near busy roads and others that will not. An experiment conducted in the United States of America in 2013 aimed to demonstrate what happened to birdlife when traffic noise was brought to a roadless environment. The researchers found that bird abundance declined by 1/4 in the presence of traffic noise, with some species avoiding the area almost completely. This experiment mirrors what is proposed with the Jandakot Eastern Link Road. A busy road will be brought to a roadless environment where it can be expected that some species won't be able to live with the noise. Bush Forever Site 388 was named as a Bush Forever Site because of the plants and animals found on the site. One of the animals listed as being significant for this is the honey possum. This is a tiny little marsupial, about the size of a mouse, that feeds primarily in Banksia woodlands. Honey possums were known to occur on this site in 1998, when this site was given the Bush Forever title. Honey possums were still there in 2014, when the city commissioned a fauna survey of the area. Threatening processes for the honey possum include fire, predation by introduced animals, and clearing of their habitat. Honey possums are not common in the metropolitan area. This map, taken from the Atlas of Living Australia, shows the records for honey possums in our area. It has just one record for the City of Canning, and that was in 1934. Bush Forever Site 388 may be the last place in Canning where honey possums persist. Given how special we know this patch of bushland to be, giving it the classification of environmental conservation seems like the least we could do, as is closing the road reserves for Govan and Lothian roads. If either of these roads is allowed to go ahead, it will put pressure on Bush Forever Site 388 and the remaining honey possums. In fact, the local biodiversity strategy already recommends the closure of the road reserve for Lothian Road. So closing both of these road reserves is little more than what the city was planning to do anyway. But to give our wildlife their best chance of survival, all of our remaining bushland needs to be protected, and that includes the vegetation of lots 166 and 167. In the local biodiversity strategy, the vegetation on lot 166 is classified as Crown reserves recommended to have their purpose extended to conservation. The vegetation on lot 167 is described as high conservation value local natural area. The ecological values for this area, again as described in the local biodiversity strategy, include being representative of regionally significant vegetation complex. Fencing is the first stage of protecting the remaining vegetation, and so allocating funds for this should be supported. Revegetation of the area should then begin without delay. It seems to me that Deputy Mayor Kunz's motion does little more than what the city planned to do anyway, and this is confirmed by the notes in tonight's agenda. These actions are not contingent on building the Jandakot Eastern Link Road. They are standalone items recommended in the local biodiversity strategy. Please show your support for our Canning environment and our Canning community by supporting this motion. Thank you.
Help if I turn my microphone on. Dr. Wadgen, thank you. You have up to 10 minutes.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Eddie Wayon. I'm the convener of the Friends of Kenhurst Park. I'd actually like to thank Deputy Mayor Ben Kuntz for raising this motion. I fully support it. I've actually been involved in this project since 2011. I was present at a City of Canning meeting on this matter back in those days and actually raised or made a presentation informally at a public meeting. And this is quite contrary to what I heard on the YouTube video of the meeting last week, or the last meeting, April council meeting, when the mayor insinuated that nobody had been concerned about this project. That's just not true. It's just that nobody really lives around the road, not like they did for Row 8, where the residents were vocal and numerous. But because of my interest in Kenhurst Park and surrounding bushland, it has been of great concern since 2011. I also agree with the Deputy Mayor that our environmental agencies and regulators, both state and Commonwealth, are not environmental protectors, but development facilitators. They rarely, if ever, not approve a project. So I'm not so much concerned by the road itself through the landfill area, but more by what it represents and what it facilitates. Just let me make sure I get this pointer right, or this document. Okay, so this map shows the City of Canning's option analysis, which I've seen in the attachment that I read, which shows that the proposed favoured road goes through the side of the landfill, partly through Bush Forever Site 388, and then takes a western turn along Leeming Road between Jandakot Airport and Kenhurst Park. Now, that's not actually what... I'm still working out how to get this pointer to work. Maybe I'm doing it right. It's not actually what what Jandakot Airport Holdings concept is, which is in fact that the road come to the point of the three land holdings, go down the unformed Johnson Road and cut through the bushland of Jandakot Airport to meet with Orion Road. Now, that is also not their original proposal. It's their most current one out of their master plan. The original one was that it was going to cut diagonally from the existing industrial sites in Jandakot Airport directly to the corner of those three land holdings of Kenhurst Park, the landfill and other areas. So they have changed their mind. But it is still different to what I understand the City of Canning's preferred option was at the time. It may have changed, and the current proposal may be slightly differently, because the drawings I've seen typically end pretty much at the junction of Kenhurst Park, the landfill and the Jandakot land holdings, and doesn't go any further. But nevertheless, the reason we've been concerned is that those routes that Jandakot Airport have proposed are currently uncleared. And they are habitat for even more Bankshire woodland than Bush Forever Site 388 represents. And I fully support the previous speaker in the protection of those areas. They are essential to our environment. But Jandakot Airport's proposal is completely contingent upon that road from Ranford Road going through to the end of the landfill. And if it does not proceed, their proposal will also not proceed. So Bush 388, we've already heard some of this, so I'm repeating some of what we've already heard. But supposedly, I'm making a few extra points. Supposedly there are 250 to 300 kangaroos on that site. I totally disbelieve that. It is not possible that they could be there and not be seen. Most of the site is cleared landfill. Kenhurst Park, which is the same area as that whole landfill site and the Bush Forever site, has nowhere near 300 kangaroos. You would see 300 kangaroos. There are not 300 kangaroos there. It is a fictitious number made up by some algorithm that I don't fully understand. But anyway, there are not 300 kangaroos there. They would never survive. They need water. There is no freestanding water on that site. They would not survive. That's why Kenners Park doesn't have that many.
Doctor, can I just ask you, just pause you there. Are you saying there's no kangaroos on that site?
I'm not saying there are none. I'm saying there are not 300. There are not 200. There are not 100. I don't believe there's any more than 20 or 30 at the most. I've not physically been to see the whole site, but I've been to Kenners Park many, many times. All over the site, I hardly ever see a kangaroo. I would see them if they're there. There's not that many kangaroos around.
Okay, I won't interrupt you. There's a lot of kangaroos in there. Council has actually done a number of tours in there just recently, all of us collectively, and there are a lot of kangaroos in plain sight wandering around that site. Lots.
I stand corrected then. I find that hard to believe because they shouldn't survive with all lack of water. Anyway, I had thought that the City of Canning wasn't aware that bushland, Bush Forever Site 388 had honey possums on it, but it's been mentioned by the previous speaker, so I won't belabour that point. But just to say that it is probably one of the only remaining sites in Perth that actually has honey possums on it. For that reason, it is so significant. I also asked why there is a requirement or a plan for an underpass. I'm not sure what the underpass was designed for. Where are the animals going or coming from? Let me get the next slide. So, talking about the landfill, the attributes of the landfill. The City of Canning talks about in their documentation the potential for commercial developments on that landfill. I think that actually is highly unlikely to happen in the short term, let alone the long term. The site, to me, not having been over the whole site, but having seen the edges, is very steep, very sloping. It would require a lot of remediation. Just think of what the City of Melville, the trouble they're having with their remediation and development of the John Connell Reserve. That's been an ongoing issue for 20 years. Doing something with the City of Canning landfill is not going to happen in the short term, and it's certainly not going to happen in 2 to 5 years. So why build the road to service it? You might as well wait until you get that developed before you do anything. I would much prefer to see the landfill revegetated and used for sporting facilities as John Connell Reserve is being used. And I'm actually going tomorrow night to a community reference group meeting to talk about the planning for John Connell Reserve. So, the Jandakot East Link Road, in my opinion, it is not justified. It's solely planned to supply consumers to Jandakot Airport's commercial site. They were the planners for this. They put it up to the WAPC. No one else did. They wanted it because they want through traffic to go through their commercial zone. It will create problems for the bus station, the railway station now, with so much traffic coming in that they won't be able to get through. The proposed traffic there is maybe 6,000 vehicles a day. That will be so much problem for the railway station. The initial proposal for that road was as an emergency egress and access. Well, I can see that not being necessary. You certainly don't need a 4-lane road for emergency egress and access. If there is to be an emergency requirement, there are plenty of little roads that come off the commercial area, and I don't know whether this pointer works, probably doesn't. But if you look at the map, there are some grey areas in the bushland between the quarry and the Jandakot site where you could, in an emergency, have vehicles go through and out of the site to the easterly direction rather than Carroll Avenue to the west and Jandakot Road and Berrigan Road to the south.
You have 90 seconds, Doctor.
I have 90 seconds.
Yeah.
So I can't see a need for the road. And the impact on the road, on the bushland, both in Kenners Park by being adjacent to it and the bushland in Jandakot Airport are extremely significant because that's Bankshire woodland, just like Bush Forever Site 388. And the impact will be even greater if a 4-lane road is constructed. I would rather see that road currently there be used as a short service road for the rest of the landfill until there's really a demonstrated need that it's required. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming along. The deputation has been... Can I ask you just to hold your applause? Thank you. Ms Whitehead, can I ask you to step forward, please, if you are here? I have a deputation on the same matter. Thank you. Thank you for coming along.
I'm actually humbled by being in the presence of these experts because I've just come along because I've seen decades of badly planned development which is destroying Banksia.
I'll just get you to speak into that microphone so we can pick up what you're saying, and you have up to 10 minutes.
Can you hear
Thank
me
you. I can if you speak into the microphone. Yep.
now?
Yeah, that's fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
No problem at all.
I'm concerned about the decades of badly planned development that's been destroying Banksia woodland. This area that we're talking about is home to at least 150 native plants and 99 native species, which include the southern brown bandicoot, the rainbow bee-eater, honey possum, and red-tailed and Carnaby's black cockatoos, as well as some kangaroos. So that's my concern as a private citizen. I'm not an expert like these people, so that's why I came. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Look, just for the benefit of those in the public gallery, what I've actually asked, there have been a number of concerns. Doctor, you raised a concern about the underpass and, you know, the need for it and that. I've asked the Director just to provide a little bit of feedback for you just to answer some of those concerns. It's what we do when people ask a question here. And we've also got a number of deputations coming up in a moment in relation to another item on the agenda. And similarly, because of the interest in the item, I've just asked for some feedback. And I want to thank you each for actually providing the city your deputations in advance, because that provides us with the opportunity to see what the concerns are and to provide some feedback. So it's a bit of a two-way conversation. So, Director, what I might do is I'll just ask you to just direct your response just to some of those queries raised by Ms Mawson, Dr Wayon and Ms Whitehead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've only got a few slides, but just start off with a couple of points in relation to the flora surveys. So they have been conducted for the Jandakot Eastern Link Road project area, and at this stage they haven't identified any threatened flora species. In terms of fauna, there is fauna which has been discussed tonight. Those issues will be assessed by the State and Commonwealth Environmental Agencies, so the City has referred the project under the EPBC Act to assess those important aspects. The intent of the fauna underpass obviously is to allow the fauna movement between bushland areas, reducing fragmentation risk, although it is noted that current fencing, roads and fire breaks already to some degree fragment the area. There was some noting of the honey possum, and yes, that was picked up in a fauna survey back in 2014. Doesn't diminish the species, but is currently not listed under state or federal environmental legislation. I note that in relation to the Thornley-Coburn Link project, it was noted that the loss of habitat associated with those works would not significantly impact the viability of the local population due to the availability of habitat over 700 hectares immediately outside the project area. In terms of the overall context, the City will be improving and increasing the available habitat with its enhancement works on lots 166 and 167 Clifton Road, and that involves, as I mentioned before, the revegetation of more than 67 hectares within the precinct. Next slide. There was mention of the biodiversity strategy. I wouldn't mind just quickly going through some of those components. FP14 of the local biodiversity strategy focused on the closure of Govan and Lothian roads, which is supported by staff, with the Link Road proceeding. The local biodiversity strategy recommends certain reserves be reclassified to environmental conservation under Local Planning Scheme 42, which in the case of Lot 500 is supported again by staff, but south of the other regional roads reservation in the Metropolitan Region Scheme. FP12 relates to the Canning Vale Sports Complex site and the freehold land previously identified for special rural purposes that has since been reserved. The purpose of the MRS amendment, which Council initiated or requested the initiation of in April, was to create a conservation precinct and to support the ERRF project, which again aligns with FP12 of the strategy. And finally, in relation to the strategy, there is acknowledgement that the Link Road and Sporting Complex were to be progressed in the strategy. There's reference there to providing terrestrial fauna movement between the main conservation area and the other retained vegetation, including underpasses at strategic locations, using fauna-friendly curbing and all landscaping surrounding the parking and sports facilities to use local species. So that recommendation is being incorporated into this project if it goes ahead, and other projects. In terms of some of those points raised around the need for the Jandakot Eastern Link Road and the potential redevelopment of the landfill, the city is of the view that the former landfill site can be developed, potentially for industrial purposes, and a more detailed business case in this respect will be presented to council later in the year. Main Roads WA modelling has shown that by 2031, if the Jandakot Eastern Link Road was constructed, it would reduce traffic volumes by 6,200 vehicles per day, or 12%, along Ranford Road between Bannister and the Jandakot Eastern Link Road. The Link Road is expected to carry around 10,700 vehicles per day in 2031 and will provide access to Jandakot Airport, the Waste Transfer Station, Ranford Road, or Ranford Station Park and Ride Interchange, Canning Vale Sports Complex, and existing developments service via Raycourt Road. The dual carriageway will also support access to the redevelopment of the former landfill site. If the road was reduced to a service road, as mentioned this evening, it would still have to be constructed to a 2-lane rural road standard with a similar environmental impact, albeit within a reduced footprint. It's understandable. The construction of the road and associated fencing, we believe, will improve security and safety in the area, resulting in reduced incidences of rubbish dumping and off-road vehicles, which was included in the deputation. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Director. And just so you know, everyone, I'm going to actually, we've had a request, I'm going to do it. We'll bring that item forward so you don't have to sit here all night waiting for it to appear in the agenda. We'll bring it forward so that you can hear the councillors ask questions about the matter if you would like to do that. So we'll bring that forward shortly. We have Mr. and Mrs. Chowan, is that right? Here? Are you here? Would you like to come forward? Is your wife here with you? Is it your wife that was appearing as well? Okay, well, you'd like to come forward then and present your deputation, which has been approved by the CEO, and that's for item CD 008 of 23, the adoption of scheme amendment number 11 to local planning scheme number 42, and that relates to additional uses for the Willetton industrial area. Please go ahead. I'd ask you just to introduce yourself to the meeting and just state your address, and then you have up to 10 minutes. And similarly, we know what you're going to ask. We've seen your deputation. Thank you. And the Director here has been able to provide some feedback for you to answer some of the concerns that you have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and the Council for giving me the opportunity to put my concerns and deputation through this meeting. My name is Ramdev Chauhan. I'm living at 4 Malindi Street in Willetton, and I have requested Council to look at my concerns regarding the scheme amendment 11 regarding the Willetton light industrial area. So I've been living in Willetton for last 6-7 years, and I call myself Willetton a home. Now, I came to know that the council is looking at changing the approved use of the light industrial area and authorizing or legalizing some of the use which is already exist in the area. One of the item is a medical center. I already know that there are a number of medical center exist in the area. The other item is a restaurant and cafes, and I have seen a couple of restaurants and cafes already operating in the area. Number 3 is a consulting room, which I don't know whether it's operating or not, but I have not too much of a concern. The 4th item, which is the sale of car, caravan and boats, that's something I'm more concerned about, because if you want to see, Willetton is one of the best suburb for growing young families, best public school, and it is currently looking very pleasant if you go into the neighborhood for a walk. But I don't want the council to consider to use the area for selling caravan boats or motor car, because I have seen what's happening on Leach Highway towards Fremantle, and I don't want to see that kind of a big spaces getting used in my neighborhood. The reason for that is Willetton has a very low crime rates, and the other thing is having all these type of big spaces for selling caravan boats. There will be number of people coming to the area from different suburbs, and also who knows what's going to get used for cleaning cars, caravans, and boats. So I strongly recommend that council should not consider the change of the areas to particularly the item number 4 for changing the use to sell caravan boats and cars in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming along this evening. I'll just get Director Bride just in brief to address those concerns. You can take your seat if you like, but thank you again, and please thank your wife too for sending through that information. Director Bride.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've got a table on the screen, and obviously I can provide this direct. But you'll notice in the table the 4 uses we're talking about are consulting rooms, medical centre, restaurant, motor vehicle, boat and caravan sales. So the previous zone, which was in place for around 26 years up until 2020, was the mixed business zone, and except for the consulting rooms use, the other 3, medical centre, restaurant and motor vehicle, boats and caravan sales, were allowable uses. So the owners in that precinct had the ability to apply for those particular land uses. Currently, the light industry zone doesn't allow for any of those 4 land uses. The city had attempted to seek the support of the West Australian Planning Commission to rezone the area under the Metropolitan Region Scheme from industry to urban, and that wasn't successful, but we have had conversations with the Department of Planning in relation to these 4 uses, and given the fact that these 4 uses were, or 3 of them were in place before, and consulting rooms is a lot less intensive than a medical centre. Consulting rooms is a medical centre restricted to 2 or less practitioners. That Amendment 11 is really just giving back to landowners what they previously had. So at the moment, as you'll see, there is no ability to approve any of those 4 land uses under the current zoning unless this scheme amendment is progressed. 3 of the 4 uses, as mentioned, that the landowners previously could pursue. Without a change, that is not possible. In terms of the boundary, there's no change to the actual boundary of the light industrial area. So all the amendment seeks is to allow these 4 additional land uses to be considered within the existing boundaries of the light industrial zone. So there's no expansion of the boundary of the light industrial precinct. In terms of the motor vehicle, boat and caravan sales use, as I say, that's been available for a number of years. These can be at varying scales and could suit a smaller operator. Given the lot sizes in that particular precinct, there's not going to be too many opportunities for a large operator to locate in that Willetton industrial area. They are typically found in commercial precincts, which this particular area is transitioning to. And while some do have some minor repairs and servicing, which would need to meet all environmental standards, often the smaller operators don't have those more environmentally offensive aspects of their operation. But if there is a repair focus attached to it, that would be subject to, for example, an oil and grease trap and a whole range of environmental requirements. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Director. I hope your wife's feeling better soon. I hope that information was helpful, and similarly, I'll bring that matter forward so it'll be dealt with after the Jandakot Eastern Link matter. Thanks, everyone. We'll move on to item 5, which is items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public gallery. I'm pleased to announce that the Stage 2 of Jandakot Eastern Link Road, that item will be brought forward, and we'll deal with that shortly. And CD 008, the adoption of scheme amendment number 11, the item we just spoke about in relation to the Willetton industrial area, that will also we'll bring that forward. So I'll now move to the first of those 2 items, which is the adjourned motion, Stage 2 of Jandakot Eastern Link Road, progress to detailed design phase. Councillors, we have a previous declaration of disclosure by the Deputy Mayor and also Councillor Parkinson. Councillor Parkinson's not here. Deputy Mayor, for the record, I'll just note it's been read out in full unless you want to read it again in full. Deputy Mayor shaking his head, so we'll note for the sake of the record the Deputy Mayor has made full disclosure of an interest in this matter and will remain in the room. Councillors, any questions in relation to this matter? No? Well, Councillor Spencer-Terra?
Just a couple of quick ones, Mr Mayor. And I apologise in advance. I know I have asked a similar question, but I could not find the answer.
That's all right.
Or where I had asked it, whether it was in a SIB or a meeting. But with items 12 and 14, where it speaks about the cost escalations.
Paragraph 12 and 14?
Yep. From where it goes from 6 million to just under 8 million. Is that $2 million difference a result of the labour and materials increase?
Director Bride?
Through Mr Mayor, yes, that is correct.
Yes, it is.
So sorry, is that the current market conditions or is that a change of scope?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, I might get Manager Troy Bosic just to answer that question. in
Mr
full.
Bosic, can you step forward, please? You able to, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. Through the Mayor, yes, it is all labour and cost. It was exactly the same volumes and everything, just applied new rates to all of the items that were first costed with the $6 million estimate. And obviously, if we did proceed with that project, we'd need to get another estimate, and more than likely that could have increased by another 5% if you were to do one now.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor?
So does that also include the items on page 78, the 2.1 metre fencing, I would assume it would include the drainage because that was already part of the original scope anyway, but I believe the 2.1 metre fencing is something that's come in later. Is that correct?
Mr Bosic?
Yes, there was some fencing included in there. To the exact height, I'm not quite sure what was costed as part of the project 12 months ago.
And
But it would have been at least 1.6 high
Yep.
for the Bush Forever site, and something a bit lower where it wasn't Bush Forever.
And was it the whole length of the road? So the 1 point...
Yes, the whole length of the road reserve.
Okay, terrific. And in the large attachments, particularly the Urbis report
I
on
might just ask you to
page-
sit down, Mr Bosic, and we'll just stay close. I'm sure you'll be required again in a moment. Councillor?
Just on page 8 of the Urbis report, where it's got the table of land clearing comparisons, option 1 is 38,150 square metres. Option 2 says 1,500. Is that a typo? Because everywhere else in the report it says 11,500.
So what page is that?
Page 8 of the Urbis report, but page 82 of the large items.
Sorry, and Director, did you hear the question? Did you want to have that reference given to you again?
I did, Mr Mayor. I think you just want to know whether there's a correction in the figure. We can certainly have a look at that and get back to council.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Not on that item. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Mayor Hall. Just with the paragraph 119 of the agenda briefing, it's got the two options, JELR constructed and JELR not constructed. Given that access to the waste station for option 1 is contingent on the Jandakot Eastern Link Road being constructed and that City of Canning's paying $1.546 million, should that not be reflected in the table and the total cost be $2.34 million when comparing the two options?
Director, do you want to address that?
Through Mr Mayor, the city provided direct correlation between those particular items. If we were to bundle up also the Jandakot Eastern Link Road 1.5, we'd probably also on the converse side need to include the other aspects of not building the road in terms of the roadworks outside, but this was focused directly on the waste precinct. Yep.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
But just to clarify, with respect to that, you don't get access to the waste station under option 1 without the Jandakot Eastern Link Road being constructed, as per described, and that costs $1.546 million, so that should be reflected in the table when comparing the two options.
Director Bright? Do you think?
Yeah, look, through you, Mr Mayor, we're comfortable with the way that's being constructed. If we were to bring in all the costs for the JLR and all the costs for not building the JLR, we can certainly add to the table, but that is present elsewhere in the report, which is focused on these three aspects.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, anything further?
Yeah, just a question with TPS 33. I know those boundaries were based on the original Canning Vale Industrial Park, but given that part of the industrial areas gone out of the original boundaries and that TPS 33 has been rescinded, is there scope to apply for TPS 33 funds to be used for revegetation on this site?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, currently Development WA or the old Land Corp made it very clear that the excess land from the sale of the previous public open space lands, which the city was given freehold, had to be utilised within the boundaries of that Canning Vale Industrial Precinct. Incidentally, we have looked at that particular issue, given, especially if the industrial land holdings were developed on the former landfill site. But we have internally looked at whether we could potentially ask Development WA to apply those funds outside of the boundary of TPS 33, because I think there is more community value to spend it immediately adjacent to the TPS 33 area than spend all the funds within TPS 33. So that is something that we could potentially ask Development WA to have a reconsideration of their conditions.
Deputy Mayor?
So even if you think there might not be potential in it, you're still going to ask the question?
Director Bride?
Yes, certainly we are going to ask the question, and we'll obviously update councillors as to what the answer to that broad question is. Obviously there might be some further work to do, but certainly the first pass is to get an initial viewpoint on that aspect.
Thank you. Councillor Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question to the director. Are there any environmental concerns in leaving this Bush Forever site, the subject site for Jendacote Eastern Link Road, as it is right now? If we just don't do anything, given that the council has already rejected the motion to build this road, in absence of any further intervention, unless this council decides, are there any environmental concerns? Is there any degradation or anything we are concerned about?
Just for the sake of clarity, and I've raised this a number of times, Council didn't vote not to build the road, it voted not to proceed to detailed drawings at this stage. So slightly different, but that's not what Council resolved to do on that night. So unless Council actually resolves not to build the road, which would be achieved by the Deputy Mayor's amendment, that is not what has happened. But I'll refer your question to Director Bride. Director Bride?
Through Mr Mayor, I might ask Manager Dion Johnson to answer the environmental aspects of that question.
Mr Johnson, can I ask you to step forward, please?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, can I just clarify? Are you saying if we don't do any development, what will happen to the condition of the existing site?
Can I just ask you to rephrase the question, just to make it crystal clear? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we leave the site as it is today and do not intervene at all, what will be its condition in few years? Are we concerned about it? Do we need to intervene?
Yes, we will. Like all bushland that we manage, if we don't intervene, there will be an influx of weed species, particularly flora weed species coming through, and potential for, particularly in that area, there actually is a strong presence of foxes, and so then obviously native fauna become at risk or further at risk if we don't do any trapping and the like through that area. So there will be an impact on operations. If we don't do anything, then trying to come back and actually do something and restore it and revegetate will be a far greater cost.
Councillor Singh, anything further? Nothing? I just had a question myself. I'll come straight back to you, Councillor Sweeney. Director, just in regards to the Urbis report, just page 5 of that report, which is page 79 of the large attachments, it lists option 2, it lists all the options and it tells you the length of them, and it has option 2 at 1.23 kilometres in length. I just wondered, does that 1.23 kilometres actually include the 180 metres being constructed as part of the MetroNet project, or is the 180 to be deducted from the 1.23?
Through Mr Mayor, that'd be inclusive of the existing portion that's being constructed at the moment.
Okay, so 1.23 in total, thank you. On that same page in the report, is it correct that option 3, and that's the option in relation to constructing the bridge and all those other words, would result in about 11,000 square metres of vegetation loss, with a potential loss of an additional 5,000 square metres for a potential dual carriageway? Is that still the position? Is that the position provided by Urbis? So, Director?
Through Mr Mayor, yeah, that is option 3 is from an environmental impact, given the impact on Kenhurst Park and the amount of clearing involved would be the most destructive of the options.
Just on paragraph 38 of the officer's report, it talks about consultancy and some advice from McGee's valuations. I just wondered how current that is. Has that been obtained recently? And can it be released to council? Can we have that circulated? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, that is very recent. We can certainly circulate it to the full version of the report. It is summarised in the agenda briefing report, but we can certainly email around the full copy of that particular work done by McGee's.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney?
Yes, thank you. I have a question about the main roads modelling, which I find somewhat entertaining, but I think maybe if I could ask Mr Bosnich to come up and answer my question just in regards to that modelling.
Of course, Mr Bosnich, can you just make yourself available? Thank you very much for coming up. I'll just refer the question in the first instance to the Director, but I'm sure the Director would probably defer to Mr Bosnich. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Just in relation to the intersection there of Bannister Road and Ranford Road, at present, and I think you're familiar with that intersection, we have 2 lanes that turn from Ranford Road right into Bannister Road. Peak hour traffic, the traffic goes up over the bridge, and sometimes, a lot of the times at peak hour traffic times, you can wait anywhere up to 10 or 15 minutes before you begin to be able to turn right. I'm just wondering whether or not that the modelling that has been put forward by Main Roads has allowed for this intersection, given that if we have a scenario where the Jandakot Link Road is built and it's going to provide traffic from that link road onto Ranford Road, which means it's going to increase the traffic. It's going to increase that traffic at that intersection, particularly turning right, and we already have a problem at the moment. I just wonder whether or not that scenario has been allowed for in the modelling by Main Roads. Is it included in that modelling?
Mr Bosnich.
Yep, through the Mayor. Yeah, well, the modelling doesn't go into that detail as part of the Main Roads model, the figures that they've provided now. You'd need to really drill into that area, and we got some estimates of doing an area that included Canning Vale Industrial Area as well as the Jandakot Airport area. You'd be looking at about $150,000 to do a model that detailed those intersections in a lot more detail than what the current Main Roads model provides.
Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, look, we can go on about this all night, but I think I'll take a couple of questions out of chambers here now, so I'll leave it for the next couple of days. Thanks.
Terrific. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Sorry, Mr Smith, just because you brought it up, with the option 3 of the Jandakot Eastern Link Road, that would completely bypass the City of Canning's Bush Forever 388 site, would it not?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, yes, that would be on the edge of 388.
And that would also divert all the traffic away from Ranford Road and put it onto Roe Highway. Is that correct?
Director, is that correct?
Through Mr Mayor, it would put a lot more pressure on the Bannister Road intersection rather than Roe Highway.
Thank you. Anything further?
But that would direct the traffic away from Ranford Road, correct?
Director, is that true?
Through Mr Mayor, well, it would attract traffic through to Ranford Road via the Bannister Road intersection. So it would still mean that traffic would come onto Ranford Road rather than the JELR section, which is going to be signalised. It would come through at the Bannister Road signals.
Yeah, but the additional traffic created by the link road would not end, the end destination would not be Ranford Road, correct? It would be Roe Highway.
I think the answer was pretty clear.
Yeah, it would be Ranford Road, so it'll still intersect with Ranford Road via Bannister Road. So it would go over the bridge, so the bridge would go over the freight line, and the link would start at Ranford, go through Bannister Road, through the past the SMRC, the back of the SMRC, and then over the freight line, and then into the back of the airport through the extension of Orion. So it would still connect, similar to the option 2. Just it's obviously a lot more indirect.
Thank you. I'll just ask a quick question on the traffic modelling. Sorry, Councillor, I didn't see your hand there. I'll come straight back to you. Director, just in relation to the modelling, and Councillor Sweeney raised it, just in relation to the Eastern Link Road, there would be an impact if the road wasn't built. I think there had been some modelling done around the impact at the intersection of Ranford Road and Nicholson Road and the impact on all that traffic. I'm talking about future state. If and when the sports complex is built out there. Has that modelling been done, or is that just a hypothesis in the report?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I don't believe it's been done, but I might just check with... No, it hasn't been done. So at the moment, if all our attention was diverted to the southern access rather than the Jandakot Eastern Link Road, we'd have to do a fair bit more work on that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, councillors, before we move on? Sorry, councillor, go right ahead. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I understand, the proposed conservation fence will be kangaroo-proof. Will it also be cat and dog-proof?
Director, do we know that? I've got Mr Johnson.
Yeah, he's ready
looking
to go.
Fidgety on his seat. He looks like he's heading this way. He is. Dog and cat proof? Or fox proof, was it?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we'll do our best, but I'm not quite sure what a cat proof fence may look like, so we might have to do a bit of research on that.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll then move on to the next item. I appreciate the questions. For those of you who are here just for that item, please feel free to leave. You don't have to wait for a break or anything. You can leave whenever you feel ready to. We shall move on then to the next item on tonight's agenda, and that is CD 008 of 23, and that's the adoption of scheme amendment number 11 relating to the Willetton Industrial Area. The officer's recommendation is page 107 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Thank you, folks. Anyone have a question there? Councillors, have any questions from the floor? Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, wrong one. My bad.
That's okay. Anyone else have a question for that item? Councillor Singh, you look like you're not sure if you've got a question for that item.
I was still preparing my question, Mr. Mayor.
Very happy to have you here tonight too, considering your afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for the director regarding this scheme amendment. Seems like when the LPS 42 came in action 2 years ago, just generic summary, we lost these 4 uses. And city has been trying to put these uses back and working with the MRS scheme, and it hasn't been allowed. And finally, the officer said they can allow these 4 uses by this amendment. So what's the main reason the state is not allowing these uses as part of LPS 42? Just trying to understand.
Director Bride, maybe a little bit of background on how we lost those uses.
Yeah, that's fine. Given the city had to follow, there's a model scheme text, so all local governments now have to follow a prescribed standard when they review their town planning schemes. And obviously over the years, each local government's created their own zones, and some councils, including the City of Canning, had about 17 different zones. So they've been all pulled back to 12 zones across the Perth metro area. So in doing our scheme review, when we came to this land parcel, there wasn't, under the old scheme, there was a zone called mixed business. That didn't exist in the model scheme text, so we couldn't utilise that particular zone category. And all we had, given the metropolitan region scheme, had an industry designation over this land rather than an urban designation, we have to be consistent. So the local planning scheme the city proposes has to be consistent with the state's metropolitan region scheme. We did, through a council resolution, try to get the MRS amended to change it from industry to urban, and that would open up opportunities for commercial zonings. They didn't support that, but they recently did come back and say they would be supportive if the city was looking to apply additional uses, which looked at trying to bring back some of the land uses that were in the old mixed business zone. So I guess that's where we're at to at the moment. We're trying to give 3 of the 4 uses have been in place for 26 years, so we're trying to allow that those land uses like restaurant, medical centre, consulting rooms. There's a fair bit of demand for those at the moment in that area. There's a couple of landowners that are eagerly awaiting the outcome of this rezoning to lodge applications. And as I said, consulting rooms is a very much a lower intensity medical centre. So if medical centre is allowed, then surely consulting rooms would be appropriate. So yeah, this amendment looks to really just give back to the landowners what they had before in terms of land use permissibility.
Thank you, Director. Anything further, Councillor Singh? Yes?
Just one last one, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible to take the 4th one out as part of this motion and still allow the other 3 uses giving back to the landowner? So I'm talking especially about the concerns raised about the boats and caravans.
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, that's certainly an option if one of the councillors wants to look at an amendment to the officer recommendation to exclude that use. Obviously, it would still go to the West Australian Planning Commission, who would consider whether that is reasonable or not, because they would work off the advertised version and what the community have said and what the council's position is. So they would then have the ultimate decision as to whether that should be removed. So if any councillor is looking at doing that, they can certainly contact myself and we can assist.
Can I just ask a quick question? Oh, sorry, Councillor Jacobs, just following on from that, have we had any interest from current property owners in there for that particular use, for sale of caravans and trailers and those sorts of things? Has that been of any interest to any landholders in there?
Through Mr. Mayor, it's a good point. There is a number of light industry uses, zones around the City of Canning, another being in Cannington, this one, and we do occasionally get from time to time, and there's been a couple in this precinct, where it's usually utilising the existing built form. So it's not about building a brand new showroom, it's more about trying to utilise an existing building and using the hard stand areas for usually a smaller scale operation. So I guess the risk is if you did take it out, you know, there may be people that commented on the scheme amendment that were quite happy with that use, that may be disappointed if at the end of the day that's removed from council at the end of the process. But
You're talking about without consultation?
yes, without further consultation. So that would be something that, that council would need to consider.
Councillor Jacobs.
Mr. Mayor, I'm looking at figure 1, page 109. The area in question doesn't really look much of a high flow area. So the first bit of the question is, I think, you know, there's caravans, trailers, whatever. I think they actually need a high flow. Are they probably more interested in high flow? And secondly, it looks to be quite, the areas look to be quite small. Is someone actually able to say, okay, buy 4 of them and knock it all down and put a car yard up? I would think that. That's my 2 questions to start off with.
Director, you'd be able to amalgamate lots like you can in any instance if you had the money and the time and the inclination, wouldn't you?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you can see, obviously it hasn't got the frontage to high roads. So you're right, it hasn't got the frontage that typically a larger operation would need. But we have had applicants come to us in the past who, given the internet is used to sell vehicles, we've had a few that have. Don't need a high-profile location. They can, as long as they can store some vehicles and have an area they can bring people on to test drive the vehicles. That's becoming more common lately. So you don't need, for a smaller operation, the high road access. But certainly, to your point, Mr. Mayor, you can certainly, if someone was interested, they could certainly buy up a number of land parcels and amalgamate those.
Thank you. Anything further? Yes, Councillor
Thanks,
Jacobs.
Mr. Mayor. One more. So let's just say we said no boats and caravans. That's taken to a higher body, but then under West Australian law, could I just rock up there and say I'm doing it anyway and then take you to court or take it to SAT or something?
Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, if the West Australian Planning Commission got the council resolution which said take that out, again, they would make the decision. They would recommend to the minister whether that use stays in or out. if it was excluded, then no one would be able to develop that use in that precinct. So it'd be a prohibited land use, so there'd be no opportunity to have that land use.
Councillor Spencer-Teo, and then I'll come back to Councillor Sabiri.
Sorry, Director Bride said that he had some applications waiting on this decision. Are any of those applications for caravan boating or cars that you know of?
I don't think he said he had applications ready. I think he's got some people interested in the result of tonight's. Councillor Director Bride.
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, I've been involved in a couple of meetings where, as I said before, in this area and in Cannington, where landowners were looking at, the tenant was looking at only a small operation, utilising existing buildings and hard stand areas, and using the internet, or, selling the cars online and having limited contact on site. That's becoming more common in the discussions I've had. So, as I say, given the size of the lots, it's not conducive to a larger operation, but again, a smaller operation.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, my question wasn't answered. Of those meetings that you've had, are some of those wanting to have this zone? It's a yes or no.
I asked a similar question earlier and I think it was answered. I asked about was there any interest in those categories, and the answer was, I think, a no at this stage. Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, so there has been some interest in this area for car sales, not caravan or boats. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Sabiri?
During the response to the deputation, the director mentioned minor mechanical repairs. Can you just explain about that again? Is there currently any mechanical repair shops in that area? Or
Lots.
Yeah, lots.
There are lots in there that have been there for decades, Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, yeah. So that is a land use that's allowed at the moment, and again, traditionally has been allowed. Motor vehicle repair stations. So, a mechanic, auto electrician, they can operate, and they have been operating in this precinct for many years. So that use is also allowed. So if there was an operation that was for motor vehicle sales, and it involved a large servicing centre, it'd be for motor vehicle sales and motor vehicle repair station. If the repairs, I guess the workshop or had minor repairs, then it would be considered as part of it would be incidental to that use. So that would dictate whether it falls within the two different land uses, but both are allowed or would be allowed if this amendment went through.
Councillor Sabiri, yes, of course.
Yeah, just to make sure. So there's already mechanical repairs in the area. So adding the adding boating caravans, and if they want to have minor repairs with it, it's not going to really affect the amenity as such. Is that correct?
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, no, it is going to be a long transition from this area. There's a lot of, there's a couple of smash repairers in there that are historical. There's a whole range of mechanical uses in there. So if anything, these sort of uses would help with that improvement of the amenity.
Just a quick question from me, Director. Does the city see that by actually adding these uses, we'll actually return to some consistency in our industrial and commercial precincts? I know, of course, just in relation to the items that's been brought up, we obviously have car yards all down Albany Highway in the city centre precinct, or adjacent to that. We have wholesalers in Welshpool and businesses in Welshpool. Also in Canning Vale, of course, we have a big Toyota dealership and many other businesses out in those other areas. Is that the intent of this, to return some consistency to the scheme?
Through Mr. Mayor, the intent of this is really just to apply this land use specifically in this light industrial zone, rather than apply it to all industrial zones, which again is another option as part of another scheme amendment. But one of the reasons that this area could accommodate that use is that there really is only a small area in the city where you can have car yards, which is really primarily along the Albany Highway frontage. So it's a small highway commercial zoning which allows for car yards. Other than that, there's not really many areas they can go to. So that's one of the other reasons why the city is supportive of having that use in this area.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Thank you very much, councillors. Thank you for those of you who joined us this evening for that item. We move to item 6 on tonight's agenda, which is reports of committee meetings. There are none tonight to be discussed. Back to reports. The first item being item 7.1, the responsible officer being the City CEO, Mr Michael Littleton, to my left. It's OC 005 of 23. The title of the report being Annual Review of Delegations of Authority for 2020 to 2022 to 23. The recommendation is on page 5 of the agenda and is on screen right now. Is that date right on that title of that report? CEO, the recommendation is on screen. Can I just ask in the first instance, is the title right? Should that be for 22-23?
It is correct.
It is correct?
Yes, it's a
Okay.
review for this year.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors, on those delegations? Thank you. Then we shall move on immediately to item 7.2, the responsible officer being Ms Lorraine Driscoll, the Director of Corporate and Commercial. The item is CC 008 of 23, proposed road closure, portion of Castledare Place in Wilson. The officer's recommendation is on page 12 of the agenda and is on screen. Any questions in relation to that item? Yes, Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Has the city conducted the traffic counts of the local road network as requested by council at the April 2022 OCM?
Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to take
Director
that question
Thank you.
on notice and get back to Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Councillor. Your next question?
Yeah. Figure 2 on page 13, there's an area shaded red near the entry and exit to the loop road. Would the city be able to explain what that indicates?
Just give the Director one moment to catch up to that.
Figure 2, it's a red...
Figure 2 on page... Did you want to
13.
That, Director Bowe? Yes, I'll ask Ms Driscoll to... Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll invite Chris O'Connor, Manager of the area, to come and discuss that.
Chris, would you like to step forward, please, and answer that question? Did you hear the question?
Good evening. Yes, I did, Mr.
Thank you.
This particular sketch, Councillor Bain, relates to the development plan that was submitted, I believe, as part of the structure plan application. I'm not directly familiar with it, having not been involved in that matter, but my assumption would be that it relates to the pavement areas of the road as it is at the moment that may need to be removed to configure the new design of the land that's developed on the top side of the page. So there'll be a series of roadworks undertaken, and that would be an area that would be removed of bitumen and then reinstated as verge, would be my understanding based on my interpretation of that sketch.
Councillor Bain, you're going to follow-up question? Happy with that? Thank you, Mr O'Connor. Any further questions on that item, councillors? Thank you. We'll move to the late item, which is the proposed differential rating. That's CC 009 of 2023. The recommendation is on page 2 of the late items agenda and is also on screen. And just a minor change will be made to the officer's recommendation before publishing the OCM agenda later this week, and that is that the heading in the table should read, of course, 2023 to 24, not 2022 to 23. Any questions on that item, councillors? Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Hall. With respect to the unimproved land and the proposed rate, our rating strategy dictates or states that it should have a positive differential of 60% or 160%. The statement of object and reason for differential rating proposes 170% due to new gross rental valuation applicable for the 23-24 and in order to comply with the legislative provisions of minimum rates. Are you just able to clarify what that means, why you've gone to 170 and not 160?
Director.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. The increase reflects the revised GRVs that we've received in terms of valuation for that category of land. It also reflects the increased costs which have come through in terms of our materials and contracts, etc., and the servicing of that land, and it complies with the requirements of the Act, and the maximum amount is up to 200%, and we're recommending a 70% increase, 170 of land.
Deputy Mayor.
But just to clarify, the justification for increasing it from 60 to 70 is 160 to 170 is due to the new gross rental value applicable for the year, and in order to comply with the legislative provisions of the minimum rates. What does that have to do with increasing it from 160 to 170?
Director, are you able to provide a response?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. The reference to the legislation reflects the ability to increase up to 200%. That's what we're referring to in that justification. Does that assist?
Deputy Mayor.
So why have we gone away from our rating strategy? Like, is there a reason?
Director.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. It also reflects the general increase in costs across many different categories of expenditure.
Deputy Mayor.
And just lastly, do we have the map of the area with respect to the changes in GRVs yet?
Director Driscoll.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can provide that over coming days.
We'll get that out to you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Any further questions on that item? Councillor Singh, and then I'll come to Councillor Sweeney. Councillor Singh.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director. Can you please confirm the proposed dollar rate in dollar value results to exactly what percentage of rate increase for residential or on an average for city residents?
Director, can I ask you to provide some context around that for the councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The dollar increase has been applied as per the approved long-term financial plan of 4.65%, which is applied against the existing GRV. That is then used to determine the funding required for all of the expenditure and capital costs of the city. That is then further analysed in regard to the different categories, so residential, improved, residential, unimproved and vacant land, and then it is then further refined in terms of the minimum rate. And what I also should tell you as well, when we in the initial discussions in regard to the long-term financial plan and the average rate expectation was 1,320, and with this modelling it's now 1,313, so a reduction in what the initial estimates were for residential.
Slight reduction. That's a good outcome. Councillor Sweeney.
Yes, thank you. Just for some clarification, is the city proposing at this stage to increase waste charges, the emergency services levy and the security levy?
Yeah, they're not out. Director.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're still working through the analysis of those, and any of the additional increases will come through those workshops. We haven't finalised those figures yet.
Have there been increases announced in any of those categories? CEO? Heard nothing? No? Is that a no? Thank you. We're talking about the security levy as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, I can only say, look, in our budget workshops, we've forecasted a 3% increase in those levies, which ultimately, when we apply to the 465, will decrease, our basket of goods from 465. But we, as you know, have our consolidated budget workshop at the end of this month, where we'll be presenting all of those elements to council for final deliberations prior to the June special council meeting.
And having said that, councillor, we were budgeting on that 2.8% increase into the street lighting, and as you know, 43.8% has been announced by Western Power, which has essentially put an $830,000 black hole in the city's budget halfway through our budget. So it's really requiring us to recalibrate and re-review and start almost again. So yeah, it's a very volatile market, not helped by those sorts of announcements. Councillor Sweeney?
Yeah, look, I thought you'd say that. So just at this stage, though, just in regards to the waste, the emergency levy and the security levy, at this stage, that's the proposal. Before we go to these budget meetings, is it's coming from the administration that's what we'll be looking at on each one of those line items. We are looking at a 3% increase in each one of those line items.
CEO.
No, we've workshopped with you the requirements to increase those levies. Now, remember, some of those, they are cost recovery budget packages for waste and for the emergency services levy. We have taken into consideration the change in service level that the city has been looking at. For instance, the ESL, we've sought to increase the security incentive scheme from 20,000 to 100,000, and there are some other elements in that program that have been taken into consideration to determine what the ESL will be next year, or proposed to be next year, and we've done the same exercise with waste. We did run that through in the last budget workshop, Councillor Sweeney. As I said, we will be presenting that matter again at the budget workshop on the 23rd of May.
Councillor Sweeney, anything further? Happy with that?
Thank you. Let's move on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything further? Deputy Mayor Kunza.
I just wanted to clarify, there was just a bit of discussion about the ESL and the emergency services levy. That's the state government levy and it's not ours. So we'll find out that during budget time from the state government.
Thank you, that's correct. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We shall move on then to the monthly financial report of April 2023, being item CC 010 of 23. The recommendation is on page 19 of tonight's agenda, and that recommendation is also on screen. Any questions in relation to that item? Yes, Councillor Amanda Spencer-Teo.
Just with page 33, where it's got the infrastructure programs, it says that Shelley Beach Park has commenced and is on track. We as a council haven't seen anything for that, so I was just wondering, how is it commenced and what track is it on?
Which track is it on? Director Bowe?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's on track for the forecast that we provided to council as part of this budget, which is design after the consultation, which has been completed, and we'll be presenting some of the concept plans for the playground later on in this financial year for delivery next year.
Thank you. Later on in this financial year, which is only a few
So
weeks
considering
away.
it's May, we should be seeing something in the next few weeks? Is that what you're
Director,
saying?
by the end of the financial year?
In the next few weeks, Mr Mayor.
Okay, and also with Kent Street as well, it says this is underway. How underway is Kent Street?
How underway is Kent Street, Director Bowe?
Well, it's well underway, Mr Mayor.
Well underway, apparently. Yeah.
It may not be nearing completion for the scope of the $8.6 million parkland redevelopment that we'd envisaged, but certainly there's been a number of elements of the redevelopment delivered, and this year was in relation to consultation, and we have briefed the elected members on that. Next year we'll be looking at doing some further works on the wetland buffer between the park and the river, the delivery of the dog exercise area, and some further design and consultation in relation to the storage solution for the Canning River Canoe Club to make way for the district level playground.
Well underway. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director Bowe, for that. Any further questions before we move on? Go to Councillor Sweeney first, and then Councillor Bain. Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I'll start off with the internal budget. Just on page, where is it, 25, 26, I think it, page 26, at 35, the revised forecast operating deficit now stands at 4.08, just over $4 million. And we're talking about Jandakot Airport Link. So if we have to return that $5 million, what does that mean to our finance sheets?
Director Driscoll, are you able to address that? If we hand back $5.3 million in grant funding to the state government, what does that mean?
So the figures that you're seeing here reflect, sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, the figures that you're seeing here reflect our operating budget, and our, as you're aware, our forecast deficit for the year was around about 3 million, which would have included that grant figure. However, there would have been a project matched against it, so it will have a nil impact in terms of bottom line.
Councillor Sweeney.
So no impact if we give that $5 million back?
Doesn't place us in a better position, no, not financially. Any further questions?
Yeah, I've just got a couple more too.
Yep, go ahead.
Just on page, I'm just going to flick to page 30, bear with me. Yeah, okay. So just with our capital expenditure, the variance of, I think there's a variance there of $26 million hasn't been spent, which is quite a bit of money. I'd like to know, one question there would be, how come we haven't spent that, given that we've only got like 6 weeks to go before the end of the financial year? And yet, when I have a look at our employee costs, we've nearly spent all our employee costs except for 3%. So we've spent almost all our employee costs, but we've only spent half of our capital expenditure. Is there some explanation for that?
Director, are you able to provide some commentary around those questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of our capital expenditure, up until the end of April, as you point out, we've spent just under 28 million. We also have commitments of about 13, so that gets us to about 42 million of our total capital budget of 54, and that represents 73% of our capital projects having started. But it is quite common for, as you would understand, for capital projects to span over a longer period than a fixed financial year. In terms of our employee expenditure, that's correct, we are down, but I think it's 1.3 million. There are additional costs, obviously, in terms of contract costs as well in our materials and contracts, but we expect with the employee costs that there will be potentially some savings throughout the year.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney?
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, so looks like we're going to have an underspend that we're going to carry over. Have we got a projected figure at this stage on what that carryover figure is going to be?
Director, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. No, it's too early for us to give you that exact figure at the moment, but there will potentially be a surplus, and as per the budget parameters, that will go into our reserves for any projects that are not. So that would be the net carryover, the net surplus at the end of the year. So some projects will get carried forward to next year, and the funds unspent would be allocated to reserves.
Yeah, I understand the process. I was just asking whether or not at this stage, whether or not we've got a figure that we're projecting on how much we're going to be carrying over. That's all.
Thank you.
Not at
Director?
this stage.
Not at this stage.
Okay, thank you. And just one final question, and that's just on the warrant list, page 47, I think it is. Somewhere. Hang on. Yeah, on page 47, it's about halfway down. I think the reference number's 055215, Office of the Auditor General. There's an amount there for $68,000. Is that from an audit that usually happens into the city's financial statements annually? Is that what that amount's for, or if it's not for that, what's it for? And if it is for that, when would councillors be likely to see that report?
Director, are you able to answer that, or our legal counsel?
Sorry, might just take that on notice to be 100% sure of this answer, but that is probably the amount that we spend on the annual OAG audit. And that is reported through the Audit and Risk Committee through to Council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah,
Yes,
that's probably where I'm asking it from as a representative of that committee. I just saw that amount and I just thought, well, is it for that reason? And just the other question I have is, are councillors going to be afforded that report to have a look at? Yep.
You are, yes. It is
All right.
made available to Council through the ARC. If the answer is different, I will double check that tomorrow, but if there's a different answer to give you, I will give it to you, but I think that's the answer I've just given is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Page 32, we have Project 34, Shelley, 96 Barbican. That project wasn't in last month's financial report. Can we have some further information, please?
Director, do you want to take that on notice? We'll take that on notice, Councillor Bain, and come back to you with that. Any further questions, councillors, before we move on? Thank you, then we shall move on. We've already dealt with CD 006, which was the item brought forward, the Jandakot Eastern Link Road. We now move to report CD 007 of 23. The title of the report being the initiation of scheme amendment number 12 to local planning scheme number 42, increasing the density of various lots bound by Lacey Street, Campbell Street, Crawford Street and Redcliffe Streets from R20 to R30, and that is Queen's Park, I believe, is it? Is that right? Or East Cannington, East Cannington. Thank you, Director. The recommendation is on page 95 of tonight's agenda and is on screen. Any questions, councillors, in relation to that item? Councillor Jacobs.
I suppose the court, in short, why R30? Could we not go to R25? I believe the zone behind it is
It's
moved.
surrounded by R30. I think they're adjacent
I think
property.
behind is, go back further in East Cannington,
Yeah.
it used to be R20 and it went to 25, so I just wanted to know why R30, not 25.
I think the report sets out fairly clearly the reasoning behind it, but I think that's essentially it. Consistency with the zonings in adjacent and around it. Director?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. Given the proximity to the train station, R30 was considered the most obvious density code. The City of Gosnells do have an R25 coding opposite, but given this particular land parcel is probably the last block in that precinct that really needed to be looked at. Most of the other precincts around it are R40. If you get closer to the train station, it does graduate to a higher density, but R30 over that whole precinct is going to add another 40 or so dwellings, so it's not a huge increase in density.
Thank you. Any further questions on that item, councillors? Councillor Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is, this amendment is initiated due to a request from one of the landowner who is in this area. My question is, why city hasn't looked into this before and why this is a result of a request from a landowner?
Director.
Through Mr Mayor, from memory, I think there was a request made when the city reviewed its local planning scheme 42, a late request to look at this particular area. At the time, given we'd already advertised the scheme, we thought it was best looked at separately. Obviously, the landowners, it's a pretty simple, straightforward amendment. You're right, one of the landowners within the area has proposed it. Very low cost amendment to get a planning consultant. I believe those costs have been shared amongst a number of landowners. Whether it's initiated by the city or a private landowner, it's still the same process.
You're obviously very impressed that the city listens to its residents. It's wonderful, isn't it?
I am. It's good. Yeah, I hope it will encourage other landowners as well to.
Thank you.
To request stuff. Second
yes,
question.
Of course.
This site in question has a lot of mature trees, real good big trees, and the development which will occur at this site will, and all those trees are on private land, will highly likely see all those trees cut down. My question is, are there any restrictions or a policy to compensate for the loss of those mature trees which we can impose on the developers?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, one of the good things about an R30 density is it then comes into the medium density code, so which has got a lot of provisions around tree retention, but more predominantly around new trees. So that's mandated within those particular codes. So yes, there's going to be some of that vegetation that would be removed as part of individual developments on that land holding, but replacement trees will be mandated throughout that R30 precinct as per the new state government medium density code.
Thank you. Councillor Severi?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just following up from Councillor Singh's question. There are a few land holdings that seem to have mature trees. Are these trees native? Do we know?
Director, do we know anything about those trees on private property?
Through Mr Mayor, I believe they are native, but I can follow it up with our park section and get back to council.
We can follow up.
Okay, thank you. If they are native and of high value, considering that East Cannington is one of the areas that has lowest tree canopy. Would there be a possibility that the city could purchase those lands?
Purchase the land. If you wanted to put a motion to council to purchase all of that land, I encourage you to do that.
No, just the land that has a lot of trees and vegetation, remnant vegetation on it.
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, there's always a possibility, but you will be paying, the market land values you'll be paying for residential zoned land. For that land parcel would be a multi-million dollar purchase by the city.
Thank you. Councillor Singh, we'll go back to you just quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question actually based on questions asked by Councillor Saberi. Do we have any special reserve fund for such thing to purchase land for tree retention or making a park and stuff like that? And if we do, what sort of money do we have in that reserve fund?
Director Bride?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This area is part of Town Planning Scheme 21, so we get contributions from developers as they subsequently develop their land. TPS 21 identifies where all the proposed public open space is. So we get the monies collected are then used to purchase the public open space areas identified in the structure plan. Obviously, with this particular area, there is a public open space area designated. It's got a few trees on it, but it's not that particular lot that Councillor Sabiri was talking about. There is $7 million around about in the TPS 21 public open space funds, and that's primarily there to purchase the public open space identified on the Town Planning Scheme 21 map. It's difficult to deviate from that unless you wanted to buy more, and that may be outside of the use of those reserve funds, because those reserve funds really are to buy the land that's designated for TPS 21 public open space.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
I was just through you, Mr. Mayor, to Director Bride. With respect to your comment before on moving R30 into the newly changed medium density and the changes with respect to tree retention and deep soil provision and so forth, does that take into, if there was premeditated clearing right now, does that get encapsulated? Like, I'm just trying to think back to when we spoke about the changes at the time and the potential effect. Is this an example where it would actually be looking at the lots now when it's R20 and changing to R30 as to what's proposed in the future?
Director Bride.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, there's numerous landowners in this precinct. The amendment process would still have another 18 months to go, which is probably not bad timing because the medium density code has transitional requirements. So it comes in initial phases in September this year, and then it's got a 2-year phase in. So, certainly there is an option for developers to develop to the R20 standard or even the R30 standard under the existing provisions while the transitional period's in place, but certainly at the end of that 2-year period, the R30 is mandatory. So unfortunately, there's a bit of a lag, given the government wanted to accommodate the building industry to ensure that they could ease into the new changes. So it'd be voluntary for a certain period of time, and then after that 2-year period after September 2023, so 2025, it will become mandatory. Yep.
Deputy Mayor?
But just to clarify, if all that was in right now, some of these significant trees might be marked for retention. Would that be correct?
Director?
The R codes as they're proposed, and even our local planning policy that we have in place, does promote retention, although it is difficult on smaller lots. So where retention is not possible, given the location of the trees and given drainage requirements, there is a requirement to plant new, mature, advanced trees, and they're protected in perpetuity. So it is difficult to retain every tree on a land holding. They have to provide justification as to why they can't retain those trees, whether they're positioned near property boundary lines or positioned in the middle of the block. If there's reasonable reasons why you can't, then the next step is to plant new trees as part of the development.
Yeah, so what you've just said is my point. when we were talking about this a year or so ago, I was raising the fact that you might end up in a situation where you have the unintended consequence of premeditated clearing. If they were to clear right now, would City assess applications as to what the land was like now or what the land is at the time of the application coming through when the new R codes come into effect?
Director, and we'll move on, I think.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. You're right. If the land was cleared now under the current environmental clearing regulations, there's nothing that would stop a landowner removing some trees on their property at the moment. But any new developments post that clearing would have to meet the requirements of the R codes in terms of new trees being planted.
Thanks, councillors. Any further questions in relation to the scheme amendment, not trees?
Not trees, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
With the proposed amendment for going up to R30, does the internal, it may be here somewhere, but does the internal road plan change significantly?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, no, the existing road layout in Town Planning Scheme 21 would still be applied, and that'd be would be able to cope with the slightly higher density.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on then to the next item, which is CD0, we've already done that, 08 of 23. We'll move on to the next item being EN007 of 23. The responsible officer being Mr Warren Bowe. That's at item 7.4 on tonight's agenda. The title of this report being High Road in Augusta Street in Willerton, Federal Black Spot Project. The officer's recommendation is on page 117 of the agenda. Deputy Mayor, I believe you've got a question you'd like to ask in relation to that?
Did you remember that from before? Smart and switched on. Yeah, through you to the Director, I was just wondering if the City is aware of what any projected traffic flow changes will be in the area, because the other two roads that it will rely on is Roxby Lane, which the City is going to be putting speed mitigation devices on due to the current issues, and then Acanthus Road has historically had issues, and the changes obviously is pushing the vehicle traffic onto those roads. Does the City have any estimates as to the disturbance in the traffic flow that way?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have no traffic counts at the moment, but I'll consult with our traffic engineers to see whether we've had any projected impacts on those associated roads.
Thank you. Anything further? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
As per point 5, it says that we obtained the funding in 21-22. Does that mean we would have applied for it the year before, or have we applied for would we have applied for this earlier?
Director Bowe, what would have been the timing of the application for black spot funding?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We made the submission in July 2020.
Thank
July
you.
2020.
Councillor?
And was that as a result of the amount of accidents or complaints or things that we got from that area, or was that as part of a advocacy?
Director Bowe?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It was in direct response to the number of crashes at that intersection. There were 21 crashes and there were 5 of them, 4 being of high severity.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question from me, and then I'll come straight back to Councillor Bain. I was just really impressed with the amount of feedback we received, and I did have a conversation earlier with the CEO. I just was hopeful that the City will take into account some of the feedback that was provided, including around truck servicing, Bunnings in particular, that are often stationary, parked, not illegally, but parked in Roxby Lane, preventing vehicle movements and also sight lines and whole raft of issues. Is the City intending to take some of that on board and instigate at some stage some traffic controls around there, parking controls, or are we going to actually implement this and then watch and see? What's the position going forward?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Certainly there are already some parking restrictions and parking controls in the area, but I think the feedback, and I think your point may be whether the City intends to be a bit more proactive with the businesses there and trying to get a larger degree of compliance, particularly on Augusta Road, where outside of Bunnings, some of their delivery vehicles do idle and await access into their delivery points. But yeah, certainly we can take that feedback on board.
There was also feedback in relation to, I think it was Central Locks on the corner of Roxby and Augustus, and they raised concerns around the traffic calming measures, that one of them would be almost adjacent to their driveway where vehicles come in and out. Is that going to be looked at? I mean, I think they were just hoping we would take a common sense approach to it, and I've got no reason to believe that we wouldn't, because that's our normal way.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I noted that comment myself. We wouldn't be going along and installing any traffic treatment without engaging directly with the adjoining businesses and trying to site them.
I knew that would be the case.
At an opportunity or at a location that's mutually beneficial.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. At what point was a roundabout ruled out as a potential treatment?
Director Bowe.
I can't answer that question, Mr Mayor, but I will consult with the traffic engineers. We went through a number of options, including a signalised intersection, but I don't know the exact answer, Councillor Bain. I'll revert.
We'll get back to you on that, Councillor Bain. Thank you. Any further questions on that item, councillors? Thank you. We shall then move on to EN 008 of 23, Tender 19/2022, mowing of city verges. The officer's recommendation is on page 131 of the agenda. And yes, there it is. It's on screen now. Any questions in relation to that tender? Deputy Mayor, first off.
Thank you. Through you. When exactly did the city first outsource this service?
Director, when did the city first start outsourcing the service?
I'll take that on notice, Mr Mayor. Partially, it's been outsourced since my time, since 2017, but I'll get back to the Deputy Mayor with some exact figures.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I wasn't quite sure of this. If, like, in splitting the contract, if one of the contractors has issues, does the other contractor have the capacity to take on the shortfall?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's not the way it's intended, Mr Deputy Mayor. The shortfall and supplementary labour, as well as engaging with the not-for-profit sector, aims to just build some additional capacity, and we would deploy staff and other resources to that area, but we wouldn't anticipate any crossover between the contractors' contract.
So by splitting it, you're just mitigating, reducing the amount of affected area, so it's easier to then move into replacing that service.
Director?
Yeah, that's the intention, as well as modifying the way we deliver our services to our other verges, and being able to then redeploy some of those resources seasonally as required.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
And just with the expected costs of the unkempt mowing service, if it remains historically low in terms of the responses, how is that reflected in the contract, in the cost?
Director Bowe?
I may ask Mr Johnson, the Manager of Parks and Environment, to answer that one. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Mr Johnson, did you hear the question? You did? Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we have flexibility in the contract to give them whatever total work is required, so there's no pre-commitment for unkept mowing for the contractors.
Deputy Mayor?
So if it, through you, stays at the amount that it is now, it would be a massive surplus in terms of funds unspent.
Yeah, correct, but we also have identified opportunities to reallocate those funds.
Thank you. Moving south, Councillor Jacobs.
Is this the south direction, is it? Okay. Two questions. One, I suppose that both revolve around technology. Is there any capacity to use technology to, in the future, lower our costs? One, through electrification, and two, through automation with sort of robotic mowers and stuff on, say, fixed areas that we actually control?
There's always an opportunity. We have our first electric lawnmower, don't we? A commercial lawnmower, but just a brief response, Director, if you don't mind.
The answer is yes, Mr Mayor. We would be.
We would always look at any opportunity, wouldn't we?
Technology opportunities.
Always looking at opportunities. Yep. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Is one of the respondents the city's previous verge mowing contractor?
Was that the case, Director? Do we know?
Yes, it was, Mr.
It
Mayor.
was? It was.
So obviously it's mentioned in the report there were some issues surrounding that. Is the city confident that they have been addressed?
Director Bowe.
Yes, we are, Mr. Mayor, but it should be said that our contractor wasn't the only contractor in the sector who had trouble with human resources and the application and securing human resources, just as we, with our own internal workforce, have faced continual challenges over the last 3 years in maintaining a full staffing contingent to deliver these services.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
An issue I'm sure that most of my fellow elected members have dealt with is waste being left on verges after mowing has been completed. Will the contractor be required to remove all lawn clippings, and will they not be allowed to just simply blow them out into the street? Thank you.
Have we tightened the scope on the contract? Is that part of it? I
Well,
see
as far
Mr
as
Johnson
reasonably
heading this way with
practical, Mr. Mayor.
a knowledgeable look on his face. Director, do we need him?
We do, Mr. Mayor, but I would add, as far as reasonably practical, we would be asking, our contractors to leave the verges in a clean and tidy state. But regulating that and making sure compliance is achieved with that is difficult. But I will ask Mr. Johnson to
And if
add
people
that.
made a complaint, I mean, if we received feedback to that effect, we would obviously contact the contractor and
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor.
Talk about
It would be
remediating it.
it would be part of the performance requirements of the contract, but we cannot guarantee 100% of the time that all grass clippings from the 130 odd hectares of verges that we maintain are removed by the contractor.
Mr Johnson, have you got anything you'd like to add, or you?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just add that for major arterial roads, we do program the sweeper to come through after us as well to tidy up anything that's not left on the actual verge.
We'll keep an eye on the contract, Councillor, I think, and a couple of new contractors. We'll keep an eye on them. Thank you. Any further questions on that item before we move on to the final item of this evening? Thank you, councillors. We shall move on to the Directorate of Dr Sarah McQuaid, the Director of Customer and Community. It's CO 003 of 23. The title of the report being Review of Customer and Community Policies. The recommendation is on page 140 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
You knew they were coming. Just quickly, with point in the community grant CS01, in 0.5.7 of the policy, it says that applicants can't lobby or seek support from elected members. However, points 5.2 and 5.4 clearly state who the decision makers are with grant applications. So I'm just wondering, also I noticed that there's concerns raised in the community grant guidelines as well, saying that canvassing of elected members makes applicants ineligible. But considering we have no say in the grants, I'm just wondering what the concern is with that.
Director McQuaid.
Thank you for that, through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Spencer-Teo. I think the concern has been is that we know that community groups will try and lobby elected members, and certainly in my time I've had, not anyone sitting around this table, but I've certainly had elected members ring me directly about considering a grant application from a community group. So I think it's just about being clear that, it needs to go through due process, and it's probably more a point of just making it clear to community groups what are the due processes and who they should and shouldn't try and lobby.
Okay, and second question is, under this policy, there's no mention about faith-based activities or organisations. Does that mean under this policy that we would accept applications from churches and religious organisations?
Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it does. If I can clarify that though, our consideration of any grant is that the grant being applied for goes towards activities and services that benefit the broader community, not just, say, a church group. In the last 10 months, we've received 12 applications and we've provided grant funding to cultural organisations for religious festivals and festival activities, hence why we've always maintained an open approach and haven't tried to preclude religious organisations. How far would we go then that might preclude religious-based activities or cultural festivals?
I just had two questions of my own, and I apologise if I missed the memo, but I just had a bit of an issue, and I'm not too sure whether it's too late to change the direction of this. Just the policy statement talked about financial support for community groups, and I wondered that we should be talking about assisting them rather than financial support. That was in the policy statement, I believe, but that was just a comment. My real concern was in relation to the inclusion of public and private schools, but public schools into the grant funding program. That appears to be a new inclusion. I say so hand on heart. I've been a former chair of a local primary school myself, and I know other councillors sit on some primary school boards, but I just have a real philosophical problem with the City of Canning supporting in any way a public institution in a government department that has about a $10 billion annual budget. And I'm wondering why we've dipped our toe into that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to schools, it's not a new inclusion. I think when the policy was reviewed in 2019, there was a discussion with Council about the inclusion of schools who had been prevented before. Again, the grant guidelines are very specific that for schools applying for funds, that the activities have to be open to the broader Canning community and not just for their school. The new inclusion that we have done is taking on board feedback to include school boards and parent groups, but I believe some schools have more active parent groups than others, so it again falls down to the guidelines, and they're quite specific in what we will fund and won't fund for school groups.
So will that extend also to, there was a little bit of a gap in our policies in relation to things like school awards. We're often asked for book awards and prizes for school students to provide some sort of mentorship or encouragement. Is that encapsulated in here somewhere, or is that to be found somewhere else?
Through you, Mr. No, it's not encapsulated in here because this obviously is about monetary grants specifically too. But as you'd all be aware, there have been occasions where we have donated passes to leisurplexes, or we have sponsored a book award or something like that. Doesn't sit under this policy.
We had without naming names, we did have a recent, in the last 6 months, a school approached us wanting us to sponsor a prize to the tune of about $1,000, an annual sponsorship. Where would that be covered then? That's not covered under this sort of funding? That would be covered under sponsorship, or that would be covered elsewhere? That's not the intent of this policy?
No, that is not the intent of this policy, but with the youth team and the development of a youth grant going forward, we are considering how we would encapsulate those.
Terrific, okay, that's all I had. Apart from that, I'm happy with it. Councillor Singh, your microphone's still on, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just interested if it's possible to provide the total monetary value of the grants we have provided in this financial year so far. Rough figure will do. Thank you.
Have you got a rough figure at the top of your head, Director, or would you like to take that on notice?
I'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Take that on notice and get back to you, Councillor. Thank you. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, Councillors. We'll move on then to item 8 of tonight's agenda. Notices a motion for consideration of the next ordinary council meeting. There are none. Urgent business at item 9. There is no urgent business tonight. Confidential matters. There is also none. At item 11, closure. There being no further business, I thank you all for attending. Thank you. And I declare the agenda briefing now closed, the time being, by my recollection, about 7:57 p.m, and I thank you all for your attendance. Thank you, councillors.